Philadelphia was a clear choice to host this year's conference. Not only do we have a local planning committee that has been deeply dedicated to the success of the conference and to ensuring that it has impact both in this city and beyond, but they've also been hard at work on the ground, transforming blighted blocks into models of revitalization that we all can learn from. 18 months ago, when we hosted Reclaiming Vacant Properties in New Orleans, the city was dealing with a severe housing crisis. As you all know, many indicators now suggest that we're in a period of recovery. But as you also all know, both from statistics and from your very personal experience working in communities, that recovery is starkly uneven, and large swaths of our hardest hit cities and towns are being left behind. The work that we do at Community Progress and that our partners do and that so many of you do every day is aimed at ensuring that vacancy and abandonment do not drag down our neighborhoods, but that this land is instead viewed as an asset that if managed and reused responsibly can contribute to the economic and social well-being of residents and to a broader, more inclusive recovery. I hope that this conference leaves you with a sense of the great opportunities ahead of us.
I love being with all of you because you're optimists. You're optimists because you're here. There are a lot of people, maybe the majority of people, that see vacant property as a liability. You're here because you see it as an opportunity. And it is an opportunity. I speak as mayor of a city that had lost half of its population, with large swaths of land and vacant steel mills. And if you go to Pittsburgh today, you'll see many of those old steel mill sites, wonderful mixed-use land. We bought it very cheaply because very few people saw it as an opportunity. And that's what we're here talking about. We're with 4 mayors who are those optimists who see opportunities in their city with this property. Let me now introduce them. What we're going to do is ask them to say a few words about their cities and then have some questions among ourselves and then ask you to participate if you have questions or ideas. The purpose of this is to trade information, to understand what we need to do collectively as communities to get control of our futures. And this land represents our futures. So let me first introduce Pete Buttigieg. How's that?
Pretty good.
I asked him what nationality his name was, and he says Maltese. Have any of you ever met anybody else from Malta? And so it was a pleasure to meet. Pete is a newbie, a year-and-a-half mayor in South Bend, Indiana, who had the audacity to say in 1,000 days he's going to address 1,000 vacant properties and turn them into opportunities in South Bend, Indiana. And I'll ask him if he has a calendar on his wall. Mayor Karen Freeman-Wilson is from Gary, Indiana. Gary, Indiana, 20% of the properties in Gary, Indiana are vacant. Churches, businesses, 20%. Can you imagine? And she is tackling that. She's a newbie also. She's mayor just for a year and a half, and is pursuing a dollar sale for houses to begin to build the kind of momentum you need to turn things around. Mayor Mallory is trying to figure out what to do after being a mayor. Being a mayor is the best job in America. We try to keep that a secret. He's in his final term. He's term limited. He's the mayor of Cincinnati, Ohio, which I think, for all of you who want to see a remarkable development, I think the best development in America is happening right now in Cincinnati and over the Rhine, an area that was notorious, written off, a lot of vacant property, and is now a remarkable turnabout with a wonderful partnership between the mayor and city and business leaders in that community. Mayor Ed Pawlowski from Allentown, a city that's undergone tremendous changes, and he is running for a 3rd term. And he's also announced yesterday, I have to say, that he's running for governor of Pennsylvania. You know, I've almost come to the conclusion, there you go.
Thanks. Thanks.
I've almost come to the conclusion that I never want anybody to be a mayor or a governor or who have not had to actually run something. It's often easy to talk about things in the Congress or in the legislature. It's much harder to actually make things happen. And that's why I love mayors. So with that, let me ask Mayor Pete to talk a little bit about his initiatives in South Bend, Indiana. A few minutes, not...
Sure, and I'll be brief. My name is unpronounceable, and we found that to be an asset because when you have a Maltese name, you can allow the people on the west side in a place like South Bend to assume that you're Polish, and then on the east side, they can assume that you're Czech. And in other parts of town, they can figure that you're Belgian, and it works very well politically. So we like to keep it that way, but most people stick with Pete, which is fine with me. Just to give you a sense of why this is so central to us, I would invite you to take the perspective of a mayor. And you're taking office in a community that was brought to its knees half a century ago, a company town that lost its company, in our case, the Studebaker Car Company, which employed tens of thousands of people at its peak. Population fell by about 30%, and yet the city seems to be showing evidence for the first time in a long time of believing in itself again. There's a real but fragile momentum. All through your campaign, you've been hearing on the porches and on the phone calls that vacant and abandoned houses is perhaps the #1 issue on the minds of voters, or the #2 right after jobs. But you also realize that if this was easy, somebody would have done it a long time ago. You're succeeding the longest serving mayor in the history of the city, somebody who used federal funding to demolish over 500 vacant and abandoned houses, and yet you can barely tell when you're in the neighborhoods. Everybody's expecting you to do something big, and yet the problem is intractable, and many of the houses have been abandoned ever since before you were born. Which, by the way, was 1982. You can settle your bets on that.
Don't rub it in.
So what can you do? And in order to start finding a structure for a solution that would work, we thought it was important to have the structure the solution follow the structure of the problem. And we started peeling away the different layers of the problem. The first problem, and the obvious one, is economic. You got a vacant and abandoned home, it tears down the value of the properties around it, and it's going to be contagious. It's going to lead to more vacant and abandoned homes. But as you get beneath that, you realize that the biggest problem with the vacant and abandoned properties is what it does to the psyche of the city. And the idea, to put it simply, of challenging the community to address 1,000 houses in 1,000 days was to turn that on its head. To make the motivationally destructive effect of seeing vacant and abandoned properties, a lot of which were concentrated on our most visible corridors, a lot of which send the message to any given neighborhood that the city doesn't care about them. And take that motivational factor and turn it around and make this a focal point for all the different things we're doing in the community. We chose the target of 1,000 after a lot of internal discussion, partly because it was a target that was slightly too high to realistically do with government funds alone. So we structured the solution so that it would be reachable if and only if we got some help. So we're doing our part, and I'm working with our council to set aside the right level of general fund dollars. We're trying to unlock certain redevelopment resources that had not traditionally been used for housing. But we know that we also have to unlock help from the private sector, and there's a spectrum. It's everything from somebody mowing the lawn on a property in their neighborhood to making sure you use code enforcement to get owner-driven rehab where that's realistic, to encouraging individuals to acquire properties next to them and take them on as side lots and find ways to at least not have a tax penalty for doing that. All the way up to engaging some of our biggest private sector institutions in the community to help us address housing at a large scale. But we had to begin by sending the message that this is a community challenge, not a government challenge alone. And we use the metaphor of the fundraising thermometer, if you've ever seen a United Way campaign or something like that. How many are we up to today? And now when I meet somebody who wants to be supportive of the community, wants to fund something, I often start with the question, how many houses can I put you down for? Now, the problem is, how much is a house? It could be about $5,000 if we're only talking about demolition. It could be 30 or 40 times that if we're talking about a proper rehabilitation of a historic structure. And the more we're able to get by way of resources, the less we have to rely on demolition, which is very important if we circle back to what I was saying earlier about what this is doing for the psyche of the community, because all of this will work if and only if the neighborhoods believe that this is being done for them and not to them. And for that to happen, they have to know that this is not simply about tearing down 1,000 houses in 1,000 days, but addressing and having a richer sense of what it means to address vacant properties, whether that involves demolition or not, is one of the areas where my team and I have found community progress to be an extremely beneficial world to learn from, because there are so many exciting ideas. I think I'll stop there, but I'm excited to get into a conversation about how that'll work.
First and foremost, good morning, and I want to just thank our partners at Community Progress for not only creating this forum, but for also issuing me an invitation to talk about something that I'm very passionate about. When you think about Gary, Indiana, depending on your generation, there are two possible things. You could think about the Music Man, Gary, Indiana, Gary, Indiana, not Louisiana, Paris, France, New York, or Rome, or it's Michael Jackson. I'm going back to Indiana. And, but some of the things that you don't think about and you may not know about is the fact that we have a poverty rate that nears 40%. And that, like Pittsburgh, we lost over half of our population, and that, as Mayor Tom said earlier, that 25% of our property is vacant, but we just had to do a little bit better. And so about 4 years ago, we lost over 50% of our budget as well as a result of state property tax caps. And some people often ask that, knowing all of this, why would you run for mayor on the first day that the property tax caps came into effect? And I think that it really goes to what I'd like to begin a conversation about abandoned property, about anything about. It's all about vision and perspective. You can talk about programs, you can talk about policies, they're all important, and I'm sure we'll talk about that during this panel, and I'll talk about the Dollar House program. But I think that when you look at the city, when you look at the challenges, when you look at everything that you're confronted with, you can see the problems or you can see the potential. And that's really the message that we had to lead with when we went into office. And so as I approach abandoned properties, I think that perspective is important. And the perspective that we really gained, and I got this perspective, I didn't have it on the first day in office last year, but I arrived at it by walking through the neighborhoods, by looking at the abandoned homes, by looking at the abandoned properties. And the thing that struck me over and over and over again was that even in those neighborhoods where 80% of the properties on a block were abandoned, the 20% that remained, the majority of those properties were kept in such a pristine condition. And so this quest on our part became an effort to honor those people who may not have had any choice about leaving like the others did, but to also honor the people who had choices and who chose not only to stay and to stand in the tradition of Native Americans and their staking ceremonies, but who decided that they were going to keep their properties in a way that they wanted to see other properties kept. And the thing that we really had to resist was to say, because these people have been so faithful, because these people are so inspirational to us as a team, as a city team, that we couldn't just go all over the city starting to clean up, starting to demolish willy-nilly. Quite frankly, we couldn't do it because we didn't have the resources to do it. But that we owed those citizens a plan that would be comprehensive, a plan that would involve all potential programs and policies, and a plan that was sustainable so that they could see a remarkable change, not just in their communities, but in their city. And so that's where we developed our, that's how we developed our demolition program. That's how we developed our code enforcement, with that perspective and with those people in mind.
We're going to explore that more. Thank you. Mayor Mark.
Yes.
Tell us about Over the Rhine and what else is going on in Cincinnati.
Well, thank you.
Let me interrupt you.
Yes, interrupt me.
Because our host
Please,
just showed up. Mayor Nider, why don't you do a welcome for us?
Keep going.
And we'll give you a chance. Okay.
I would never interrupt Mayor Mallory.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, first of all, for the bacon, because I had bacon this morning, and I've been craving bacon for the last 4 or 5 days, and I couldn't get it because I was out of the country. So thank you very much. And it's good bacon, as Mayor Nutter pointed out, because in Philly they have good bacon here. Now, just a show of hands, how many of you come from towns where you have mayors? Oh, wait, you all do. That's right, yeah. Well, this is important because having someone at the helm and having someone leading the effort is important. And I start by saying that because I believe that at this point in time, for cities to really transform themselves, you have to have committed people, which all of you are, but you also have to have some kind of leadership that is willing to step out there and do the things that are necessary to make the transformation. Now, I have to get a shameless plug in here because I always do this, but Peg Myrtle is here from PNC Bank. PNC Bank is like a great partner for me in the mayor's office, so please give a round of applause to Peg and PNC Bank. I also do advertisements for Excedrin because when you're a mayor, you constantly have headaches, and so make Excedrin a part of your daily life. Now, I want to talk about Over the Rhine. Over the Rhine in Cincinnati is an area of Italianate housing that was built in the 1880s. It is perhaps the largest collection of Italianate architecture in any concentrated area anywhere in the country. In the 1880s, this area would have been full of beer gardens and restaurants and shops and about 25,000 people. It would have been a mixed income area where shop owners would operate their shops, perhaps live over them and rent out the space in the third and fourth floors. And over the years, the area fell into decline. And by the 1970s, this was a drug-ridden, crime-ridden area filled with prostitution and sort of crumbling and falling apart. And there had been efforts to revitalize the area by lots of individuals and organizations. But there had never been a centralized effort to really take hold in the area. When I became mayor in 2005, the area was in bad shape. Most of the housing was vacant. There had been a proposal just a few years earlier to just scrape the whole area, just tear it all down and start over. But we decided not to do that. Working with a group called 3CDC, the Cincinnati City Center Development Corporation, it's too hard to say, so we say 3CDC, we started the process of going back into Over the Rhine and reinvesting in those buildings. And 3CDC is headed by a guy named Steve Leeper, who actually used to work for Tom when Tom was mayor of Pittsburgh. And the organization works with the city in partnership. So we have given TIF incentives, we've given a few other incentives. They've used historic tax credits, new market tax credits. They've gone in and acquired hundreds and hundreds of vacant and abandoned buildings. They have gone through the process of renovating those buildings, turning them into condominiums and apartments. They have refinished retail space, about 84,000 square feet of retail space. So at this point, they have redeveloped, I think, 300 or so apartments and condominiums in the first phase, 84,000 square feet of retail in the first phase. They are into phase 4 now, I believe. And the city of Cincinnati invested about $30 million, which leveraged about $200 million in this private development. I think it's important to talk about the history of a community. I'm a big fan of reminding people of why communities were great, of why they have the names that they have, the people who were there before. I think it is important to lay out all of that history because it sometimes gives us a pathway to our own future. It sometimes gives us the energy and the renewed effort that we need to have to bring back the former glory. That is something that we focused on quite a bit in the city of Cincinnati, and we're going through a renaissance. And as we get into the discussion, I'll tell you about a few more projects that we're working on.
Mayor Ed.
Well, Allentown is very similar to Gary and South Bend. We're a third largest city in the state, but we were a medium-sized city, a Rust Belt city, with the same problems of urban decline, lack of resources, industry that had picked up and left over the course of time. But we still had a lot of assets, and I think all the mayors have said, you need vision, you need to be able to think outside the box, and in many cases, you need to be able to take the things, the assets that are laid before you and figure out how to utilize them in different ways. And that's what we've done in Allentown. And if in some cases, if you don't have the assets, you need to figure out how to craft them. And so we had a difficult situation. Our urban core had just been sucked dry. The city was still, certain parts of the city had some vibrancy left in them. On the west end of the city, which was the more affluent part, we had the east side and the south side of the city that were pretty solid blue-collar neighborhoods. But the urban core, the most densely populated area of our city, really was just sucked dry. Business had left. We had a thriving retail facility down there back at the turn of the 1980s. We had a department store called Hess, which they still talk about to this day, which was at one time in 1970 was the highest grossing department store in the country. They actually grossed $170 million out of one facility right in Center City, Allentown. They picked up and left. They decided to close that store. The mall was built in the adjacent suburbs, sucked all the retail out of downtown, and really was left with a sort of a rotting core. And so I realized early on as mayor, no matter what I did, no matter how well the West End was doing or the south side or the east side of the city was maintaining itself, if the very heart of your city, just like the heart in your body, if your heart isn't functioning correctly, your whole body isn't functioning correctly. And if a heart of a city isn't functioning correctly, the city eventually will die. And so we had a challenge. We had to rebuild that very core. We also had another challenge. We're on the border of New Jersey. And so what was happening in the housing boom back in the early 90s is we had a lot of absentee property owners coming in. They saw the decline, they came in, they bought up cheap properties, they were deconverting many of these row homes that were once single-family homes into multi-unit properties, over-densifying our neighborhoods, and so we had an absentee problem on top of it. We didn't have a lot of actually vacant properties. Most of our properties were just being blighted by lack of investment and attention from these absentee landlords. So we attacked it in two ways. We wanted to bring back business and folks back into the urban core. We didn't have the dollars and the resource to do it. An opportunity opened up, thanks to you, where we had a minor league team from the Phillies. We had built a minor league stadium several years back, a AAA team of the Phillies, and so we had a minor league facility that became really successful. In fact, it's the most highly attended minor league facility in the nation for the last 4 years, over 700,000 people. Mike decided, rightly so, that he wanted to keep more of a revenue in his city, so they tore down an arena here in Philadelphia called the Spectrum, to create this great Xfinity Center. Well, that opened up another opportunity for Allentown, which was a minor league hockey team. And they wanted to move up into our area, into Allentown, the Lehigh Valley, because they saw that there was opportunity there as well because of the great success that this minor league baseball team was having. But we didn't have any resources. We couldn't really build a facility to house them. We didn't know how to build a facility to house them. We used up all our resources building this baseball stadium, which was before I was actually right before I became mayor, and they stuck it in the wrong place. They actually stuck it on the outskirts of the city, right at the city, edge of the suburbs. And I said, no, we got to revitalize our downtown. We have to build it in the urban core. So we actually came up with new legislation, working with my Republican senator, my Democratic state rep, who was in leadership at the House that time. We crafted legislation called the Neighborhood Improvement Zone, where we actually are capturing all state taxes, everything, sales tax, income tax, cigarette tax, anything that isn't constitutionally restricted for the next 30 years for both public and private development. That has created a massive amount of momentum. We have over 1 million square feet of new office space going in. We have 4,000 jobs coming into our downtown. We were able to build a new arena for not only the Phantoms, but it's a 10,000-seat arena right in the very heart of our urban core. It's bringing in investment. Over $1 billion of new development is underway, and we have 5 or 6 cranes up in the air. So, Allentown, through some creativity, was able to get that, and we did it without any guarantees from the city, the county, or the state. It was all based on the zone. And that's a whole story in itself I won't get into because it's too long, but it was a very creative way to pull in the resources. But I also realized that no matter how much we build new developments downtown, if we didn't address the surrounding neighborhoods that were around it, all this development would not be successful. So we've attacked blight on a number of different levels. We looked at every tool that we had. We copied tools. They have a sweep program here in Philadelphia. We copied the sweep program. It's a ticketing program for quality of life issues. We issued over 15,000 sweep tickets last year, from everything from garbage to broken windows to dog feces, and it has had a tremendous effect. We increased our code enforcement. We redid our zoning to make it more form-based. We started attacking the issue of absenteeism. I actually started a program called the Landlord Hall of Shame, where I actually, every few months, I pick a landlord who has just totally ignored our codes. I go out, we do a nice press conference in front of their property. We do pictures of where they live in New Jersey in their nice, pristine houses. We put them on our website. We'll send out press releases to their local paper. I will post with big poster boards. And we keep, every time they tear them off, we keep putting them back on. Nice big, plastic poster boards, their home address and their home phone number. So everybody in the community can call them and tell them how much they appreciate them running down the property in their neighborhood. It has worked tremendously. Every time I do one of these, I have probably 50, 60, 70 absentee property owners calling us up saying, what do I need to do to stay off the Landlord Hall of Shame? It's very simple. We just say, you need to comply with our codes and fix up your property and invest back in the community and not have your property be a blight on the rest of the neighborhood. So we have been trying to tackle the situation using anything that we can, using carrots, using sticks, like the Landlord Hall of Shame, trying to deconvert properties back to single-family homes using the limited resources that we're getting from HUD to basically deconvert these properties for first-time home buyers. And over time, over the last 8 years, and it's taken a long, I don't know, about 1,000 days. I applaud you. That's a it's a challenge. But over the last 8 years, we have had a systematic reduction. We're down to now in a housing stock of over 48,000 housing units. I can say that we probably have over less than 300 properties that I would consider blighted or abandoned. That's a pretty good number for a city our size. We still have a lot to accomplish, there's no doubt about it, but we're making that incremental progress. It's having an effect on these neighborhoods, and we're seeing investment come back into our urban core. And that's what you have to do as a mayor. I mean, Mark is right. You gotta take that leadership. You gotta look creatively. What I found after many years of trying to address blight is that there's nothing new under the sun. I'll copy programs that are good. You adapt them to your communities, and you try to take the tools that are available and utilize those tools in ways that will really make an impact and a difference on your neighborhoods. That's what we've done in Allentown. We've been changing it block by block and neighborhood by neighborhood, and it's been making a difference.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor Nutter. Mayor Nutter is in his final term, though, and I remember him as a young councilman coming out to Pittsburgh when I was mayor, when all things were possible.
Yes.
And now, after being mayor for 6 years, are things still possible?
all
Tell
things
us
are
about
possible.
some of your wonderful initiatives. And
Thank
welcome
you,
us also.
Sure. Mayor Murphy, thank you, and my fellow mayors and the Reclaiming Vacant Properties Conference. Thank you all for being here in Philadelphia, and Tamar and the entire group. Thanks for choosing Philadelphia for this 5th annual conference. Listening to my fellow mayors, I thought we were the only ones that had any challenges in cities all across America, but some very, very creative ideas. And Mayor Pawlowski, I look forward to increased tax revenues to Philadelphia, given the many accolades that you've given us for things that have benefited Allentown. So I look forward to a great revenue sharing program, thinking outside the box for the city of Philadelphia. I can't wait to get those extra dollars.
All I need is a football team.
I can't help you with a football team. Go Eagles. Great effort last night. Yeah, I've heard that before. Probably from a vacant landowner. What you've heard from many of the mayors and for our guests, again, welcome to Philadelphia. Philly is a town of 1.5 million people. We're the 5th largest city in the United States of America, with population growth for the first time in 60 years after the 2010 census, and the city grew in 11 and 12, and we expect 2013 to show the same. We have about 40,000 vacant properties all across the city of Philadelphia, with certainly great pockets of concentration in north and west and south of Philadelphia and a number of other areas, but great concentration in those neighborhoods. We've utilized a variety of strategies and tactics. We have a number of great agencies that work with property, but therein often lies a challenge. Property owners, people who are trying to acquire property often didn't know which agency to go to. Could it be the Department of Public Property? Could it be the Redevelopment Authority? Could it be could it be related to the Housing Authority? And so what we've tried to do is, first and foremost, get all of those agencies to work together, and we've gotten great cooperation from them all. And I saw over on the side Chairman Chris Ross, who's the chair of the House Urban Affairs Committee for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and through his efforts, we were able to revitalize and reshape and bring into the fold our own housing authority right here in Philadelphia. So I want to thank Chairman Ross for that work. The Housing Authority in Philadelphia is a huge property owner and, of course, landlord for thousands of families all across the city. We've put together something called Philly Land Works. We've tried to take on this great challenge of having one place for folks to go. People don't really are not too particularly excited about running from agency to agency. And so through that work, and it's taken some time to put this together, but now you can go to one place, all the agencies working together, they'll figure out amongst themselves who actually owns that particular piece of property and try to expedite a person through it. As I've often said, you should be able to acquire a property somewhere in your own lifetime and not have to pass that task on to your children. Going after property owners, I am what is that?
Landlord Hall of Shame.
Landlord Hall of Shame. That's exciting. Maybe coming to a neighborhood near you soon here in Philadelphia. But we've tried to utilize, we have time in our court system for a blight court. And so we've taken about 500 properties through that process, gotten about $1 million in fines and another $800,000 in permits and licenses that people were supposed to get. There are some who clearly have adopted the philosophy that it's easier to ask forgiveness than to ask permission, and people just go about doing what they're doing. And so through the Department of License and Inspections and other agencies, you do have to chase after these folks, or through the law department, through sheriff's sale. We're tripled the number of properties that have been going through sheriff's sale since a 2010 amnesty program. And so being aggressive about revitalization and development, as you've heard from all the other mayors, critical, having plans in neighborhoods and community engagement and buy-in, having a wealth of CDCs, community development corporations throughout the city, and we've had a long history of supporting many of those organizations, doing great work throughout the city. Those strategies, those tools, that kind of aggressive activity, getting your own folks together inside the government, which, tradition is one of the toughest things to break. Why do we do things this way? Well, that's the way we've always done it. And I'm sure my fellow mayors have heard that answer from time to time, which is never good enough. Because the real question is, why are we doing it this way? Does it make sense to do it this way? And is it more efficient to go after properties in a different fashion? So we're utilizing a lot of different strategies and tactics. Funding, always a challenge, and the cuts that we've seen from the federal government have made getting revitalization that much more difficult. And so we still need a variety of state and federal tools to invest in neighborhoods, to bring back that revitalization, get those property values up, and make the quality of life better in our city and many other cities, certainly across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but I would suggest across the nation. So those are some of the things that we're doing.
Let me get into some questions. We talked about how important it is, and I think you all reflect that, the mayor being the leader and also being an entrepreneur and understanding how you figure out how to make this happen. These vacancies didn't happen overnight. They happened over a 30 or 40-year period because, as somebody said, it's not easy to figure out. So you come forward with a plan. You're going to change it. Where's the pushback? Everybody likes the idea of getting rid of blighted and vacant properties, but then everybody has another idea about how to spend the money or don't want to tear down those particular houses. So where has the resistance come from, and how have you dealt with it? Is it council? Is it state legislators that have made the laws difficult to be able to move forward on these? And how have you overcome that resistance? Mayor Pete, do you want to?
I think there are two kinds of pushback. There's principled pushback, and then there's opportunistic pushback, right? So in the long history of mayors' relationships with city councils, there's some moments where I think any issue is vulnerable to politicization, even one that tends to have a lot of consensus. So early on, we were catching some noise about the idea of very proactively trying to address 1,000 houses in 1,000 days. But what we noticed over time was that actually most of the anxiety was not coming from the residents who were nearest to the problem. So every month we do a mayor's night out event, set up a card table at a school, and any citizen can come talk to the mayor for a few minutes for as long as people come. And so many times the citizen would come, or resident, I should say, would come and say, why haven't you done something about this property next to me? It's been used 3 times in the last 2 years to break into my house. It's vacant. It's tearing down my value. I would mow it if you just tore it down. I would take care of the land. So the people most immediately affected by the properties were not the ones who were resisting, but some of the elected officials who imagined themselves to be speaking for those neighborhoods did. And some of the biggest problems we had turned out to go back to misunderstandings of a factual nature. I think the one I mentioned earlier is the idea that addressing 1,000 properties means tearing down every single one of them. Another one has to do with the fact that, and I think most people in most cities believe this, most people think that the city owns these vacant and abandoned properties, especially if they've been torn down. Right. The idea that we can go in, tear down a property, and we still don't own it does not compute for most citizens. And they do not want to hear about the difference between county's role and city's role and all that. Which means the fact that it's been there all this time is taken to be a decision on our part. that we've decided that there are going to be those vacant and abandoned properties. The paradox of being in the mayor's role, I think, is that you don't have that kind of immediate control. We don't sit and decide which buildings are going to be healthy and which aren't, one by one, of course. But also that nothing will happen without us. If we're not creating that momentum and marshaling resources and motivation to do something, it will not get better on its own, because by definition, these are properties that the market has not been able to deal with.
Yes, are there people that have faced resistance like that, Karen?
Absolutely. You have a couple of types. I agree with Mayor Pete. The first type is that you have people who really profit from blight and abandoned housing. These are the speculators who come from New Jersey, who come from Chicago, who come from other communities and get the properties on the cheap. And that'd be okay if they were really rehabilitating the property, putting it back into the rental housing market, but they're not. They're just waiting for the value to go up because someone wants to buy it for an investment. So, you know, you're gonna get pushback from them. But the other thing, particularly when we looked at our Dollar House program, when we looked at other programs, we looked at the decision to concentrate all of our HUD dollars, limited though they may be, in one neighborhood, because that's the neighborhood we wanted to start with. You have members of the Common Council who say, well, why are you picking that neighborhood? Well, because the university is going to build a $40 million building. Isn't that a good reason? but it's still not my district. Right. So you have that type of political pushback, or you have people with the Dollar House program who say, well, it'll never work. No one wants to move to Gary. Well, interestingly, even though it's for Gary residents, you have to be a Gary resident for six months. The first week that it ran, I got over 500 emails from all over saying, how do I move to Gary? Because I want a Dollar House. Now, obviously, the price had something to do with it, but people, even when we explain, right, are interested. And so it's this, you know, really, people have been downtrodden for so long that they really find it hard to believe again. People always ask, what's the biggest challenge that you have as mayor? Is it the abandoned housing? Is it the crime? Is it all of these other substantive things? I said, no, it's really getting people to believe again.
I think that's so important.
Go ahead.
I mean, you know, I think one of your biggest jobs as mayor is to be able to sell this vision. You have to sell a vision, because, you know, even with things going up, and you know, it doesn't matter. People all, the general population still has this perception, this perception of the blight and the downward turn that the city has taken. And, you know, changing that perception is probably the hardest thing that any mayor can do. We're constant salespeople. We have to constantly sell that vision. You have to constantly sell the potential of what, you know, those neighborhoods could look like, or what that development could look like. And, you know, it is a constant struggle. So yes, you have council, you're going to have political interests, you're going to have, you know, economic interests that are always coming at play. But I think the biggest challenge that I've seen as mayor is being able to really convey that vision to the general public, and being able to sell them, you know, that, yeah, you know what, it's bad now, but hope is on the horizon. Right. And, you know, for years, I was going around, I have a little PowerPoint, and they call me PowerPoint Pawlowski, because I would always take this PowerPoint all over the place, you know, and to anybody who would listen, and, you know, and sell them, well, this is what the city's going to look like. This is what the downtown could be. This is what our neighborhoods could look like. You know, and after years of doing that, I had a construction worker come to me the other day and said, you know, I remember seeing your PowerPoint and I thought you were crazy, you know, 7 years ago, right, but hey, it's really happening. I'm like, right, yeah, you know, thanks.
Mayor Tom, one of the points you raised was it didn't get that way overnight, and it might take a few more days for the revitalization. Unfortunately, I think as Mayor Ed said, in some instances, folks have literally watched the glacial decline of their neighborhood. And you could literally have neighbors on the same block with a difference of opinion as to whether or not that one house should come down. Now, it is dragging down, unfortunately, the values of many of the homes, if not that entire block. But, I mean, I've kind of been on both sides of this. I was a member of City Council for 14 and a half years. And so, you know, dealing with neighbors, I mean, there's the block view, there's the next door neighbor view. There's the neighbor who will take care of the vacant lot next door. And yes, people do assume that we own everything that's out there. I mentioned we have 40,000 vacant properties. We own about 25% of them. The rest are out in, you know, private ownership. Seems like Jersey's taken a pretty big hit here at the table about vacant landowners. We have them from all kinds of places. Some, though, hiding in plain sight. I mean, literally here in the city and just evading their responsibility. But we certainly do have some out-of-state owners. So sometimes the neighbors want the property down. Sometimes they don't. The local elected official may have a broader vision for what is happening or what could happen in the neighborhood, working with the administration, not working with the administration, whatever the case may be. There could be a university or some other, you know, large entity that wants to do something else. And so people want revitalization in the neighborhood, but they get concerned about, you know, expansion of those kinds of entities, and are they trying to take over our neighborhood and push us out? And so there is that, at times, a tension, at times an unhealthy tension. Sometimes it's a good tension, but I think as Mayor Pawlowski said, working with neighborhoods, working with communities, working with the large institutions, if that happens to be the challenge, is a big part of the key, but also giving people a sense of what the larger vision is. What could your neighborhood be? And in many instances, certainly here in Philadelphia, in some neighborhoods, what people want is nothing. They really like us to just leave them alone. They don't necessarily want what we think is progress. But what I've often said about Philadelphians, this is my hometown, Philadelphians love change, as long as many things can stay the same. And it's just, it is a challenge. But we've made some great progress, just working with neighbors. We have strong community development corporations. Philly is the epitome of the city of neighborhoods. And so people have pride in their communities. They fight for their communities. They're passionate about their neighborhoods. And if they can trust that what you say is what's actually going to happen, in many instances, you will get progress moving forward.
Let me pick up on what you said, and I'm going to particularly ask Mayor Mallory to talk about it also, and yourself. Who are the good partners? And I think this is important for the audience to hear, that this is not just the city necessarily, but you build partnerships. The University of Pennsylvania's efforts with the city around their campuses is nationally known. Over the Rhine is really, I think, the best partnership in America right now, with the business community, the banks in the city, all coming together around a remarkable turnaround. Talk about that, and for the others also, who are partners with you in sort of sharing that vision, putting the banks, obviously, putting resources into this effort, who have your self-interests come together in effect. You know, the university knows they need to have a good neighborhood to be able to be successful. The business community in Cincinnati knew that they needed to do something with Over the Rhine because it was a blight on the whole city in the downtown. So where are those partnerships that you see there? Do you want to start, since you didn't go?
Well, you know, that's how we have made the progress that we've made in Cincinnati. It's been through partnerships. Going back to 3CDC and the 3CDC model, I mean, these are the largest corporations that we have in the city of Cincinnati that pooled their resources, worked with the city on a common vision for revitalizing the Over the Rhine area.
And let me just say, the corporations in Cincinnati, as I understand it, raised $50 million privately. Now, I want you to think about that in the audience in your community. This is Procter & Gamble and PNC Bank and Macy's and others who came together and raised $50 million that was going to be patient money loans. and then partnered with the city to invest in this incredibly blighted neighborhood. That is a wonderful model in a way that I think many cities ought to be thinking about instead of just looking to the mayor and the city to solve the problem.
Well, I mean, we thought it was important to leverage the commitment, the expertise of some of these corporations that we have in town, and obviously their dollars. I'm not afraid to allow people to make money when they're partnered with the city of Cincinnati. I think that's an important feature to point out. But I also think that you have to leverage the individual assets that may be in the community. And over the Rhine, the buildings themselves were the asset. Two people agree with me, and I'm glad about that. But I say that because I said earlier there was a proposal to just tear all these buildings down. I mean, these were all historically significant buildings. And part of the character of the Over the Rhine area has to do with the architecture of the buildings itself. And so there are communities in all of our cities where, you know, let's just be straight, you could scrape the whole community and nobody would care, right? I mean, the buildings aren't significant. You know, the culture of the community is based somewhere other than in the buildings themselves. But in Over the Rhine, it was in the physical build out of the community. So it was very important to preserve it. We also have a park, Washington Park, that was developed in the 1880s that had fallen into disrepair. That was also renovated to the tune of $50 million. And this past summer, we had a light show on our historic music hall, which was built in the 1880s, and it attracted 25,000 people in the park to see a light show and hear the symphony play outside. I mean, this was an exciting thing. Now, ironically, this was a concept that I brought back from some international travels, which when you're married, you're not supposed to travel internationally, but I do it. And I brought this back from Nancy, France, and the irony is that the weekend of this show, I couldn't see it because I was in Gifu, Japan. So you miss these things sometimes. But I think it's very important to allow for the culture of a community to be a part of the redevelopment effort itself.
Good point. Other partnerships that you've been, I mean, have any of you commented? Yes.
I can't understate the importance of university partnerships in our redevelopment effort. The University of Chicago, the Harris School of Public Policy, came in very early on at the behest of Mayor Daley. In fact, I think during his first year as a professor there, Mayor Nutter and I were both speakers. In fact, I've kidded him. He doesn't have to prepare for any classes because he gets all his mayor friends to come in and do presentations. But those students, after hearing about our challenges and our plans, wanted to come in, and one of the first challenges that I asked them to look at was the abandoned properties. So they went to Macon and got the 5x5x5 program. They went to Detroit and got the local data program. And that's helping us to revitalize. But it's not only been the University of Chicago, it's been Indiana University, it's been Northwestern, it's been the University of Illinois, and none of this has cost. And that's important when you don't have the money to pay anyway.
Right. Mayor Tom,
yes, Mayor.
Banks, I've mentioned community development corporations. Again, federal funding is tremendously helpful, and we need to stay focused on, obviously, trying to stop the significant cuts that we've seen in the CDBG program. Our housing authorities can be tremendous partners as well. But one of the keys I've also found is they're often, especially with the education institutions and medical centers, is their relationship with local education entities. And so in the K-12 education realm, partnering with our school district here in Philadelphia, and many of those institutions that I've mentioned, whether it's Penn, Drexel, Temple, St. Joe's, a number of others, have also helped to support the local education school, elementary school, middle school, if there is one, or high school. And I think that that is a critical component to economically revitalizing neighborhoods. People want to be able to send their child to a high-quality school in their community. And so that creates great value, but more importantly, obviously enhances the educational opportunity for children in that community. We have, as I mentioned, we do own some of the property, but we've also created a land bank here. We're in the process of creating a land bank here in the city, and we've had, again, great support from Representative John Taylor, who is a Philly rep in the General Assembly, and I'm looking forward, hopefully, to hearings in our City Council and supporting that concept. When we talk about trying to get rid of property out of our inventory, but sometimes for strategic purposes, you also want to be able to aggregate that land and get large elements of it. And so, as Mayor Mallory said, I mean, land has value. It is, when properly used, it is a wonderfully strategic asset to creating the revitalization and the scale of development. This idea that we've seen in some places of, kind of wholesale taking out of properties and creating, I mean, large swaths of vacancy, I think is, again, different cities have different circumstances, but, I find that to be a great challenge. You still have to take care of it, you still have to monitor it, and obviously worry about public safety and a variety of issues. So getting that property out of our inventory, getting it redeveloped as quickly as possible with community input. I mean, I think that when you talk about partners, you're really not going to be able to do anything if you don't have neighborhood buy-in to make these projects, small, medium, and large, happen. And so getting neighbors on the ground. You can have all the money, you can have all the entities all lined up, but it really is about people in their neighborhoods, in their communities. They're the ones who live there and have to deal with all the other things that go on with revitalization. But I think getting that land bank in place will be critical for us to get properties in and out of our inventory, but also give people that straight line path to revitalization.
Pete, you had to.
Yeah, there's one. First of all, I very strongly agree with all of the above. For a community like ours, the University of Notre Dame is a very important partner in every kind of entity that was mentioned. So I just want to add one other, which is on the data side and the research side. And to the city, they say, what are the main things that are important to you, and we'll start working on it. And at first, it's hard to think of something less intuitively in the wheelhouse of data folks than something as brick and mortar and kind of close to the earth as dealing with vacant and abandoned properties. But the reality is information and research and data and patterns is a huge issue for us. When I took office, nobody could tell me how many vacant and abandoned properties we had. It's actually very hard to get your arms around the problem in the first place. They're working with us on some tools that we think might be able to help us empower the neighbors in the neighborhoods by creating the online equivalent of a sort of a place to send your calls for help. So you can map it onto a neighborhood, you click on a house, and leave a voicemail or a message. Say, here's what's happening with this property, and here's what I think ought to happen to it in the program. So we found that that kind of partnership, in addition to all the vital ones that were talked about, but on the research and data analysis, is so important. We even think that if we get it right with mapping and tracking what we know and what we're beginning to know on the vacant and abandoned property front, and whole other data sets that might seem to be unrelated, like where your water cutoffs are or something like that, we might be able to create an early warning system for vacant and abandoned properties, which is important because for all of us, I think, especially when we set these goals.
Let me pick up on this, because this is, I think, one of the most essential parts of this conversation about a data-driven system. And let me just quickly go around and ask you a question. Do you have a system that you can click on that will show you tax delinquent properties, foreclosed properties, and properties already owned by the city? Yes or no?
About a third of the way there.
Okay.
In the process of development.
Just about done.
Just about done.
We have parts of it. We actually just put in.
That's all. Yes
okay.
or no?
Okay.
Parts. Go ahead.
Sort of.
Okay, I'm going to say to you, for some young entrepreneur out there, there's $1 million of opportunity to build this system, because I've really not found any system, any city in America that has that. And so what we're talking about is limited resources in a problem this big, and how you focus those resources, and what's the intelligent choices you make? Some of that, the mayor's intuitive, know that, but we've talked about it where some properties historic, you want to move that into one bucket. Another property, you could put together a lot of parcels and create a scale of opportunity for development is in another place. And so how those decisions are made about which properties you're going to move becomes really the foundation for the whole conversation. So when you say parts of it in place, tell us.
One of the things that we just did back in December, we actually put a registry in for foreclosed properties. We were having lots of foreclosures, obviously, that's affecting cities across the country. What was happening is a lot of the smaller banks they were foreclosing, but they weren't transferring title, and they weren't actually.
So it wasn't showing up.
So it wasn't showing up, and they weren't paying taxes. When you go back to the people that were foreclosed upon, they say, hey, we're out of the house, we're not, and they never transferred the title. And so this was becoming a real problem for us. Plus, they weren't maintaining the properties because there was no property manager or register. So we've actually started tracking that. We have over 600 properties that have been foreclosed or in the process or been sold again. But that has been really helpful because now our code inspectors can go in, they see the property, they know which bank owns it, they can go to them if they have a problem with the grass growing or a window that needs to be replaced, and it has really helped.
40,000 vacant properties. Your city, Ed. I can't imagine dealing with that scale.
No.
Huh? No. How are you keeping track of all those 40,000 properties?
Fairly carefully. So, the system that we have, you can now go into one place, and again, we own many of these properties, but nowhere near the majority. You can go in to our system, find out, who owns it. Are there back taxes? I think the issue of foreclosure is an element that we're adding to it, and which agency of the government actually owns it. And again, with Philly Land Works, you only really have to go to one place, and then the agencies figure it out kind of more on the back end of that process. But there is a resource issue. Again, we spend $20 million a year maintaining and taking care of many of these properties. Again, many of which we don't own. But the grass is high, bricks start falling, demolition issues, and again, going back to the mayor's point, people do automatically assume when we take a building down, somehow we magically own it. We have tangled title issues and all kinds of other challenges as to why you haven't moved that property. You literally find yourself perplexed by the question of, well, who actually owns this property? Public inventory, it's 99.9% clear. Private side, person has died, person has moved, this one's fighting over the property, issues within a family. So resources, I think ultimately really are the issue. We don't want to have that many vacant properties, but there's never, ever enough money in resources. And again, I think the mayor pointed out, in some neighborhoods, there's much less interest in revitalization than in some others. And so how do you jumpstart development in a neighborhood where virtually no one may want to invest right now? We've seen other neighborhoods that were in the same situation suddenly take off. Often that is the government coming in and making an investment in infrastructure. Right. Infrastructure is a word that, of course, makes people's eyes glaze over. It's really about, have you renovated the street? Have you done something with curb and sidewalks? Have you planted trees? Are you, upgrading the water systems and those kinds of things? And then suddenly, the private sector often will say, hey, that's a neighborhood that maybe is getting ready to take off. Or one entrepreneur or two who might own a few properties opens up a coffee shop or opens up a restaurant or opens up a retail space. The next thing you know, someone wants to do housing and then everything follows behind. And so often it is a spark that some entrepreneur has created based on public investment that may have been 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Now, we're going to take a few minutes now, and open up to the audience if you have questions. Is there a microphone? I'm all the way in the back. Do you want to bring it up here? We have a question. Do you have a question back there with the microphone? Go ahead. Why don't you start?
Question without a microphone.
There's a fellow behind the cameras with a microphone. Oh, there's one coming here. I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay. Okay, sure. To what extent, to what extent do delinquent tax collection has assisted in your initiatives that you talked about, and how do you address that?
The question, do you want to answer?
Yes. We have, early on when we came in, we talked to our county about the fact that there were so many properties with delinquent taxes in the city. And in talking to a lot of residents, it wasn't that they didn't want to pay, but the county's position was all or nothing. So I asked them to develop a payment plan so that people could, in fact, get on that plan, pay the taxes, and that increased the collection rate significantly. I mean, you know, when we came in, the collection rate was in the high 60s, low 70s. It's now up to about 77%. That's still not where it should be, but it's significantly greater just in the last 18 months. So that plays a tremendous role, yes.
Anybody else have comments about that?
Just, you know, it just points out the extent to which every layer of government's involved in the solution and often in the problem. And in a place like Indiana, a lot of it's making a deal with your county and showing them they have nothing to fear by helping you, because if you get it right, the collection rate will go up. But it's a classic case for where we have to get the different layers of government on the same page.
And just we're all mayors or former mayors here, and we thought we were very powerful. When you become mayor, what you realize, you're at the bottom of the barrel. You got the federal government, you got the state government, you got your city council all telling you what to do in many ways. And so people assume that the mayor can do this when so many of these laws really intersect, particularly around property.
No question. We have a piece of legislation actually in the General Assembly. Has come through the House over in the Senate. We have a number of people who owe us money, property taxes in particular, but other taxes, who live in Pennsylvania but live outside of the city of Philadelphia. We're trying through House Bill 388 to be able to put a lien on that person's property, which is outside the city. Philadelphia is a city and a county. To be able to go after and have further leverage on those individuals. Property tax collection.
Have any other states done that?
I'm sorry?
Have any other states done that?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I like that concept.
Yeah, so, I mean, we have a number of folks who owe us money, but don't live here. But, so they have a nice house wherever they are, and they're having a good time, and they have this raggedy...
One thing
well,
that we did
if this was solely a Philadelphia audience, I would really go into something. But I mean, they have a very raggedy property, and we need that leverage to go after them. So.
One of the things that we did on that note, because we don't have extradition powers from other states, obviously, when we started the registry and we started actually tracking, and we did a tracking of all the property violations. We also did a licensing program for landlords. But it was interesting. We had one property in particular. It was an old brewery that was down by a river, and a guy bought it in a tax sale, and it was just sitting there. I mean, it was sitting blighted for years. Ironically, we had fined him. We put every violation on the books. We took him to court. He obviously was in New Jersey. We couldn't extradite him, so he had a number of warrants out for his arrest. Would you? Strange things. He actually comes in one day to complain about a property next to him, which we then arrest him, and he spends 3 days in county prison until he pays us the $50,000 that he owes us in back fines, fees, and taxes.
So arrest him for stupidity.
We should have.
I know somebody's not voting for you for governor.
Yeah, well, he's in New Jersey anyway.
Do we have other questions? There was a gentleman back here.
Yes, my name is Stephen Cody. I'm the Executive Director of Uplifting Lives, and I am the entrepreneur with the U.S. Land Bank regarding the data. So talk to me later.
Okay.
But the question for the mayors. Would you invite and participate with private equity firms? And I mean the ones that are responsible. Like Blackstone Group owns 30,000 properties. They want to finance responsible, investors to pool properties. I'm not talking about 5 or 10. They want to do in tranches of $10 million. So it'd be 50 to 100 houses. So as the mayor of Philadelphia is mentioning, 40,000 properties, 10,000 you own, put them into pools, bundle them so they can make strategic decisions on large amounts of money, because they have access to hundreds of millions, actually billions of dollars. Because yesterday we had our session about funding. Private equity wants to invest in real estate, especially as it's appreciating. But there's got to be a more smoother mechanism where they can bundle larger pools in strategically located areas. So would the mayors respond to that question? Would they invite?
Let me tell you how that would need to work for me. You know, we got a bunch of money from the state to tear down houses, I think $3.5 million. We matched that with another $3.5 million. We probably have 1,000 buildings that need to be demolished, and we're probably at 200 so far this year. Having said that, I'm not a tear down guy. I just don't like tearing down buildings. So if there's an opportunity to not tear down buildings, I want to take that. I actually get in the car and ride around with this young man who's with me today. And we get the demo list and we ride around in neighborhoods and I point to a house and I say, absolutely not. That house is not coming down, no way. Nope, not that one, not that one, not that one. That one, yeah, you take that one down, but not those two. And I do that for a number of reasons. One, I like to be back out in the community, remind myself of what the community is looking at and dealing with. But I'm also looking at the possibility for redevelopment. Because if you go into some of these communities and you turn it into a snaggletooth block, you're never going to have the kind of redevelopment that you want to see, because the communities in some cases are such that investors aren't going to come back in and do infill building. If you get enough gaps, they're not going to revitalize the buildings that are existing. But understand my point. If I can work with investors in a concentrated area for a specified period of time, this can't be, you know, some open-ended deal where, you know, if you get around to it in the next 5 or 10 years, I'll be happy. No, 3 years. 3 years. I'll give you 3 years. I'll give you 2 blocks of a street. And I want that redeveloped. But I want to have a home show on a particular date where these are brought back online, people are put back in them, and the community is restored. Give me that and we can work together.
Other comments?
Yeah, I mean, intrigued by the prospect of having large pools of dollars. I will very honestly and in a straightforward fashion, and hopefully not hurt your feelings, suggest that we might want to work on how it gets presented and some of the language. So when I was listening to you, if I didn't know you were at this conference, I would think that we were possibly at a real estate hedge fund conference. When you start talking about bundling and pools, et cetera, it unfortunately is reminiscent of what caused possibly the greatest recession since the Great Depression. So I mean, I have to be honest with you, I get a little nervous when I hear some of that language. So I like the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that might be available, but I need to work with you to better understand what is this really all about, who's going to be in charge, who's going to be doing the revitalization, how long is it going to take, are we talking about home ownership, or are we possibly talking about destroying the quality of life and the fabric of many of our neighborhoods. Philadelphia has one of the highest home ownership rates of any major city in the United States of America. We like that. And so if we're talking about that kind of program, but the investors are nameless, faceless people somewhere, and if something goes haywire with the program, I have no idea who to chase after, I'm going to be a very angry person. So let's have that conversation.
You have anybody?
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is what is the relationship between the owner of the property and the property? If the owner of the property has only ever seen it as a line item on a computer, it can lead to situations where it's a rounding error for somebody, right? And as the mayor said, a lot of times we don't even know who to chase, right? There are all these mechanisms to obscure who even owns these properties. And I think all of us all mayors have learned to be very creative looking for capital. And it's going to come down to whether that could be structured in a mechanism that makes sure that the owner of the property, even if it's a handful of houses in little old South Bend, is a rounding error on your P&L, there's some reason that you would need to be as close to it functionally as I am, and then we could talk.
Other question. One more. Last one.
Mayors, a number of you have talked about historic buildings as being a key community asset and have cautioned us against getting trigger happy with the demolition button. And it sounds right to me, and I don't disagree with you, but on a reality level, the cost of rehabbing historic buildings, especially when they're environmentally distressed, is sometimes so high that it starts to look very tempting to go forward with demolition. It also limits the range of different redevelopment options you have. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you guys are making that cost-benefit analysis of demolition versus preservation. And I'm not talking about the no-brainers, the buildings that have no historic architectural value, but the buildings that really actually are a part of a city's architectural heritage, but nonetheless, rehabbing them poses a lot of expense and a lot of complexity.
It's tough. I mean, you have to make those choices, and as Mark said, you know, many times it's just going out there and looking at these properties and making a gut determination of what should be torn down and what shouldn't. In our communities, we share a lot of similar types of we have row homes. You know, sometimes, you know, even though a building should be torn down that's in the middle of a block because it's so blighted, you can't because it's structurally connected to other properties. Which makes it even more difficult to try to figure out how to remove that blight. And again, as you said, it goes back to resources. We don't have a lot of resources. Our resources are shrinking every year. They've cut CDBG and home dollars by over 40% in the last couple years, and they continue to threaten every single year to cut it. I mean, they want to cut it, what, 50% more this year? So, you know, and those are direct dollars that go into revitalizing some of these properties in these neighborhoods. And as our dollars keep shrinking, you know, you have limited dollars in your general fund that you could pull out to actually put into rehab. And those are things that, quite honestly, when you're talking about rehab grants and loans and things of that nature, and you're pulling them out of general fund dollars, those are things that most of the community does not understand because they're not getting the benefit of those dollars. So if you have a federal pot that's shrinking, you don't have a lot of resources, making those decisions gets even more difficult of what to save and what not to save, because you're right. At the end of the day, it's a lot cheaper to tear it down than to try to fix some of these properties up. Sometimes you have no choice if they're like in the middle of a block of row homes, but other times it really is, as Mark said, a judgment call. It's a gut call.
Yeah, I mean, I just absolutely agree. It is a judgment call. These are tough ones. You know, every old building is not historic, and every historic building, unfortunately, even in a great historical city like Philadelphia, I mean, you can't save every one of them. So, how you utilize those resources? Is there a larger plan? You know, have you looked at every possible option that you can? You know, see over on the side there, Tom Woodward and great folks at Bank of America and many, many others. Sometimes it's working with, you know, our banks and other institutions. You know, what else can be done? And we've seen some great reuses of historic buildings. Talk about the you know, house in the middle of the block. I mean, there's a story, I guess, in today's Daily News in Philly. I was doing a site visit just last week. There literally is a property in the middle of the block. It's been vacant for a long period of time. Neighbor wants it down. I mean, that will change the nature of her, you know, house, but, you know, it's causing damage. So, I mean, again, that's a judgment call, and, you know, we could take down properties morning, noon, and night. We would never have enough money to deal with all of them. So from a row home to, you know, a building that's been up, you know, for 100 years. I mean, these are the day-to-day calls that we're called on to make. And sometimes we are literally out, you know, trying to make that decision. And often, you know, agencies use their best judgment and do what they can. But, you know, if you find yourself starting to run out of demolition money 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year, you know, you're going to have to make even more strategic decisions for the limited dollars. And then there are, of course, the emergencies that no one can anticipate.
I think I would just add that that's the value when you determine that this is a historic building that you don't want to tear down. That's the value of developing public-private partnerships to really look at some of the buildings. We have beautiful architecture in Gary. Frank Lloyd Wright, not just in the housing, but also in many of our commercial buildings. And we don't have any money to preserve those buildings, but developing private partners to help us has become a key part of what we're doing.
I want to take this moment to thank all of you and to thank the mayors for what I think was an extraordinary conversation. We learned some stuff. We learned about the Hall of Shame, the Landlord Hall of Shame, which some of you might want to take back. We learned about how to build some partnerships with universities, as in Cincinnati, with the private business community to take on the issue of vacant and blighted properties. We talked a lot about the importance of what we're all here for, the Center for Community Progress, and the ability to communicate to potential partners, the state legislature, and even the federal government about how the rules need to make it easier to tackle some of these challenges in cities rather than make it more difficult. And the other thing we learned about was data, is that we heard that we need more work. We need to understand better how to make smart decisions about which properties are historic, which properties ought to be bundled together and cleared so that you can create a higher level. I'm going to take one moment and tell a story which I think was really reflected today. My wife and I, many years ago, were in the Peace Corps, and we were in a remote village in Paraguay, up the Paraguay River, a 2-day boat ride. And when we lived there for 2 years, we learned an enduring lesson, which was reflected today. That enduring lesson was that where we lived, we spoke Spanish, and a few miles through the jungle was Brazil. They spoke Portuguese, and around us were Indian villages that spoke a variety of different dialects. And the lesson we learned was that the most powerful person in the town wasn't the person with all the guns or all the money. It was the person who spoke all the languages. When we came back to the United States, what we realized was that we as a society are equally divided by race, by class, by where we work. If you work in the computer industry, half the time, I have no idea what you're talking about. And that the most powerful person in American society are people I call translators. And a really effective mayor, and you heard 5 effective mayors today, what they are translators. They're able to communicate the sense of a city into a vision where people see a place for themselves. And that's what this conversation was about today. These 5 mayors talked about a vision for their city. And they are challenged to have to get people to move along, to follow that. And that's the challenge of being a leader and of being a mayor of a city. We have this whole series of tribes, and how do we get them to move in one way? And these mayors are doing that. Give them a big hand, and thank them for coming here. Thank you. Good to hear you.